Today's submitted editorial argues that the Cleveland Browns must abandon the sunk cost fallacy regarding Deshaun Watson and be fully prepared to pivot to Shedeur Sanders to secure the franchise's future. The material makes a strong case for prioritizing future wins over past investments, but the argument feels incomplete without addressing the logistical barriers of moving on from a massive contract.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, let's look closely at the section discussing the salary cap, right? Because treating a financial reality as just this mere mindset shift, well, it leaves a pretty significant gap in the persuasion.
Oh, it definitely does.
Like, the writer explicitly notes that the veteran is in the final year of his current contract, but then they just wave away the entire financial impact by stating, that money isn't coming back.
Right, which is...
It's just telling the franchise to move on without ever explaining the actual feasibility of absorbing that dead salary cap space. It essentially asks the reader to suspend their disbelief about how professional sports actually operate.
It really does. And I think that creates a very specific vulnerability in the text.
Yeah.
When a reader, especially one who's familiar with the intricate mechanics of football front offices, when they see a writer just completely ignore the hard salary cap, they immediately categorize the piece as, well, basically fan fiction rather than serious analysis.
Totally. It feels a bit like talk radio.
Exactly. The weakness here is relying heavily on just ignoring the money. I mean, the author tells the team to move on without explaining the feasibility of doing so.
Right.
The financial pill is treated as an afterthought. It's like this inconvenience that can just be wished away with enough willpower and frustration from the fan base.
Yeah, if we just complain enough, the dead cap disappears.
Right. But in any highly regulated financial environment, which the NFL is, the money inherently controls the decisions.
Well, as an objective reader, I do completely understand the emotional impulse behind writing it this way.
Sure.
When a fan base or a sports writer is just exhausted by a situation, the natural desire is for a clean slate.
Oh, yeah.
The sentiment that the worst thing an organization could do is allow spent money to dictate future failure, I mean, that is emotionally resonant.
Very true.
But the math doesn't care about the emotional narrative. Although I do have to push back a little on the expectations for an editorial like this.
Okay, sure.
Shouldn't sports writing at its core be somewhat aspirational? Like, does an opinion piece really need to get bogged down in the dry accounting of dead cap space?
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered how constraints actually make a piece of writing significantly more persuasive.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, if you ignore the constraint, the reader dismisses you as naive.
Yeah, that's true.
But if you embrace the constraint and solve it right there on the page, the reader trusts you as an authority.
Ah, I see.
So my suggestion for this section is to integrate the financial realities directly into the strategic argument, rather than treating them as a nuisance to be ignored.
Right.
You have to frame swallowing this financial pill as a necessary, calculated risk, rather than pretending the pill simply doesn't exist. You have to embrace the math.
I see what you're saying. When you acknowledge the difficulty of what you're proposing, the proposal itself carries a lot more weight.
Exactly.
But how does a writer execute this integration without turning an impassioned sports column into just a dry, unreadable accounting spreadsheet?
You do it by tying the math directly to the human cost on the roster.
Okay.
The writer should explicitly acknowledge the specific salary cap implications of benching the veteran right there in the text, but using vivid language.
Like what kind of language?
You write something along the lines of, absorbing the historic dead cap hit of benching the veteran will undoubtedly hamstring the roster's depth across the board, but it is a necessary amputation to save the overall patient.
Oh, wow. Necessary amputation.
Yeah. You don't need a spreadsheet. You just need to show the reader you understand the blood that will be spilled to make this move.
That framing completely changes the tone. I mean, it instantly shifts the writer from sounding like a frustrated fan calling into a radio show to sounding like a pragmatic general manager addressing the board.
Yes, exactly.
But even if you acknowledge the amputation, you still have to offer the reader a prosthesis, right?
Right.
I see how acknowledging the dead cap makes the argument realistic, but doesn't that just leave the reader depressed about the state of the franchise?
Well,
Like you're essentially asking them to accept a ruined roster just to make a point.
building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of the incoming rookie's structural value?
Okay, I'm tracking with you.
You don't just leave the reader with the dead money. You propose a structural argument where the solution inherently solves the financial problem.
Ah, the rookie contract.
Precisely. The writer needs to emphasize that developing Sanders on a significantly cheaper rookie-scale contract is the exact financial counterweight the organization desperately needs to absorb the blow of the veteran's dead money.
Wow, yeah.
By putting those two financial realities side by side on the page, the argument transforms from just, wishful thinking into a viable organizational roadmap.
So a key theme running through this material seems to be the desire for a seamless transition. But true persuasion requires showing the reader exactly how that transition survives the math.
Yes. You pair the incredibly expensive problem with the incredibly affordable solution. It tells the reader that we aren't just changing quarterbacks, we are deploying a financial strategy.
Exactly. You are taking a massive negative and weaponizing it to justify your ultimate conclusion.
Right. It makes the drafting of Sanders not just a luxury, but a mathematical imperative.
But, even if the front office figures out the financial math to absorb that contract, it doesn't solve the underlying physical reality on the field.
No, it doesn't.
That dead money isn't just floating in a vacuum. It is tied to a body that physically cannot stay out of the training room.
Yeah.
Which takes us naturally to the next phase of the argument. Once we understand the financial constraints, we have to look at what the money is actually paying for.
Right.
The current narrative establishes a clean competition between the veteran and the rookie, but this overlooks the overarching theme of unreliability that has defined the veteran's recent tenure.
It really does.
I mean, the text evaluates him as a standard competitor who might simply, quote, struggle or turn the football over.
And that points to a fundamental flaw in the angle of the piece. The weakness is treating the pivot to Sanders as purely a performance-based choice, rather than a grim necessity born of sheer physical attrition.
Yeah.
I mean, the text briefly notes that the veteran is back on the field after dealing with serious injuries, but then it completely buries the health aspect at the very end of a standard laundry list of, ordinary quarterback gripes.
It does. It lists potential failures by saying, if he struggles, turns the football over, can't stay healthy.
Yeah.
It puts a catastrophic physical reality on the exact same level as throwing an interception on a Sunday afternoon.
Which is wild.
It is. I have to challenge this framing, though. Does focusing heavily on his injuries risk giving the veteran a built-in medical excuse rather than holding him accountable for poor on-field play? It's almost like the writer is evaluating the tactical game plan of a heavyweight prize fight, but completely ignoring the fact that one of the fighters hasn't been physically able to walk into the ring for the last 3 years.
Right.
Should an editorial really let him off the hook for playing poorly by just focusing on his shoulder?
Is there a risk that focusing solely on his interceptions might overlook the much larger, more systemic failure of the franchise?
Oh, that's a good point.
Because whether it's his last season with the Cleveland Browns or not, he gets so much money just being injured rather than playing.
Yeah, so much money.
As it is, I think the author's underlying instinct that it's just better to move on with Watson is completely correct. But the rationale needs to be rock solid.
Right.
Treating this as a traditional training camp battle completely undercuts the unique dysfunction of this specific era.
Because it's not a normal situation.
Not at all. The core frustration for this fan base isn't just a missed read on third down. It's that this highly compensated player is absorbing a massive portion of the team's resources, primarily while sitting on the trainer's table.
Yeah.
The author assumes a baseline of health that simply hasn't existed.
So the suggestion here is to completely alter the framing of why the leash is so short.
Yes.
We need to shift the focus away from he might play poorly and anchor the argument in the reality that he historically does not play at all.
Precisely. Reframe the short leash argument to center heavily on the veteran's lack of availability.
Okay.
The writer should make the transition to the younger quarterback an inevitable contingency plan necessitated by physical unreliability, not just a reactionary move to a bad game.
Right.
When you anchor the piece in the undeniable reality that the organization simply cannot rely on his body to hold up for a full season, the argument becomes bulletproof.
Well, let's talk about the actual phrasing on the page then. If the writer is currently using soft conditional language, like if he struggles, go to Sanders, how do they pivot that language to reflect this heavier, inevitable reality without sounding overly dramatic?
You change the conditional framing to highlight the inevitability of the situation.
Okay.
So instead of writing that soft if, you pivot the phrasing entirely to something like,
Given the persistent recurring injuries, a transition to Sanders isn't just an option on the table, it is an operational necessity for the franchise.
Operational necessity. I like that. That carries so much weight.
It really does.
It strips the emotion out of the debate and replaces it with cold, hard logic. It sounds like a mandate from the ownership group rather than, a plea from the bleachers.
Exactly.
But a highly skeptical reader might push back here. Football is a violently physical sport.
Sure.
Any player on any roster can get hurt on any given Sunday. If I'm reading this, I might say, you can't bench a guy just because you're afraid he might get tackled.
That makes sense. But could the evidence also support a different conclusion? Like the difference between an anomaly and an established pattern?
Okay, I see where you're going.
The argument the writer needs to make isn't that he might get injured, it's that he has a multi-year pattern of not being available.
Right.
So to counter that skeptical reader, the writer should introduce a specific contrast, highlighting the old football adage that availability is the best ability.
Oh, that's a classic.
Yeah. And you use it to draw a sharp, unavoidable juxtaposition between the heavily compensated but persistently absent veteran and the available, developing rookie who can actually take the practice reps week after week.
That juxtaposition neutralizes the entire debate over the veteran's talent level. I mean, arguing about a player's throwing motion or decision-making is highly subjective.
Very subjective.
Half the readers will agree with you, half will disagree, but you are asking the reader to agree with the objective mathematical fact that he simply isn't on the field enough to justify the investment.
Exactly.
Therefore, drafting and pivoting to Sanders is just responsible, pragmatic management.
It completely removes the burden of proving that the veteran is a bad football player. You just have to prove he is an absent football player, which the empirical data already does for you.
So we firmly establish exactly why the team must move on. We've tackled the inescapable financial constraint, and we centered the argument on the overwhelming lack of physical availability.
Right.
That leads us to the mechanics of the essay itself. The why is solved. Now we must look at the how.
Yes.
How does the text actually execute this transition structurally? And right now, reading through the pacing of this argument feels exactly like watching a badly fumbled baton pass in a relay race.
Oh, completely.
The material expertly explains who should run the next leg, but it skips over the actual mechanics of the handoff, risking a severely jarring experience for the reader.
Yeah, the proposed roadmap for handling the quarterback transition moves way too abruptly from giving the veteran a final chance to permanently closing the book on him.
Just instantly.
Right. The fundamental weakness in this section of the text is the total lack of a defined transition period. I mean, the writer dictates to make the veteran earn everything with a short leash, but then immediately leaps in the very next paragraph to thank him, move on, and close the book on the era.
It is a complete binary switch. There is absolutely no connective tissue between those two thoughts.
None at all.
One sentence has the reader fully committed to watching the veteran fight for his redemption, and the literal next sentence slams the door in his face and hands the keys to a rookie.
Yeah, it's wild.
Why is that narrative whiplash so detrimental to an editorial? Like, what is happening in the reader's psychology when they hit that abrupt wall?
Well, when a reader experiences that kind of narrative whiplash, their brain immediately categorizes the writer as reactive and panicked, rather than thoughtful and strategic.
Ah, I see.
It ignores the incredibly messy, complex reality of mid-season quarterback changes. In professional sports, you can't just snap your fingers and change the franchise timeline.
Right, it doesn't work that way.
No. It ignores the impact on locker room dynamics, the media circus that inevitably surrounds a benching, and crucially, the development timeline required to integrate a young player like Sanders. The writer is skipping the most difficult part of their own proposal.
As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that the writer needs to act almost like a project manager for this transition.
Yes.
When you just demand a change without mapping it out, you're ranting. When you map it out, you're architecting a solution.
Exactly.
So, what is the best way to fix this structural pacing on the page?
The suggestion is to develop a clearer, phased approach within the text to make the hypothetical transition feel robust and realistic.
Okay.
The writer needs to deliberately slow down the narrative pacing right at the climax of the argument, right at the moment the decision to bench the veteran is theoretically made. Stretch that moment out.
Stretch it out.
Yeah,
Give the reader the space to understand the mechanics of the change before rushing to the conclusion.
Slowing down the pacing to allow the reader's logic to catch up with their emotions.
Exactly.
How exactly does a writer stretch that moment out effectively without rambling, though?
You build a structural bridge, add a transitional paragraph outlining specific, measurable triggers for the switch.
Like what kind of triggers?
Well, instead of relying on a vague concept like if he struggles, establish a firm chronological timeline.
Oh, I like that.
Right? A writer could implement this by writing, if by week 6 the offense remains stagnant, or if the injuries flare up again, the coaching staff must formally initiate the transition protocol.
Wow.
Giving the reader a specific chronological milestone makes the entire argument feel incredibly grounded and thoroughly considered.
It takes the emotion out of the coaching staff's hands. It's a protocol.
Yes.
But I have to ask about the rookie's side of that equation.
Okay.
You can't just throw him to the wolves at week 6 without acknowledging the preparation required to survive that moment.
Exactly, which is why the text must include a section detailing how Sanders should be explicitly groomed as the mid-season relief valve leading up to that exact trigger point.
Right.
You have to explain to the reader that the rookie isn't just sitting idle on the bench waiting for a disaster to happen. He is taking specific first-team reps in practice, he's mastering the offensive system, and he's being meticulously prepared for a structured handover.
Yeah.
This creates a much smoother, highly logical narrative arc for the reader to follow, rather than an abrupt switch that feels born of organizational panic.
I really like the idea of setting a specific timeline, like week 6, to anchor the reader. But is there a risk that focusing solely on a week 6 timeline might overlook the very real possibility of an immediate week 1 disaster?
Oh, sure.
Like where the veteran gets hurt in the very first quarter of the season? Does locking the essay into a specific week create a new logic gap?
That makes sense, but could the evidence also support a different conclusion? Like a gradual, agonizing fade over several weeks, where the coaching staff is paralyzed by indecision.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Right. The exact week the writer chooses to put down on paper isn't nearly as important as the overarching concept of having a definitive trigger.
It's the structure that matters.
Exactly. By giving the reader a roadmap, by saying, here are the exact conditions that necessitate the change, and here is how we deliberately prepare the rookie in the meantime, you demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of football operations.
Yeah.
You transition the reader's brain from fan panic to front office logic.
The material makes a strong case for moving on, but the difference between making a demand and presenting a strategic blueprint really does come down to pacing.
It really does.
By slowing down the climax, adding those transitional triggers, and outlining the grooming process, the writer transforms this piece from a standard sports radio hot take into a deeply considered, structurally sound essay.
Yeah, absolutely.
It shows the reader that you understand the immense gravity of what you are proposing. And ironically, when you acknowledge the immense difficulty of a transition, your argument that the transition must happen anyway becomes significantly more persuasive.
The reader will follow you anywhere if they believe you have thoroughly mapped the terrain.
To briefly synthesize our core takeaways today for the writer. First, we must acknowledge the severe financial mechanics of the contract.
Yes.
The math dictates the reality, so use the rookie contract as a direct financial counterweight to the veteran's dead money.
Definitely.
Second, we must center the argument heavily on the veteran's lack of physical availability, turn his massive compensation while injured into the inescapable driving force for change, reframing the quarterback battle as an issue of attrition rather than just talent.
Right.
And finally, smooth out the structural pacing of the quarterback transition. Slow down the climax of the essay and build a logical, multi-step timeline that guides the reader through the messy reality of a mid-season handoff.
Integrating the reality of the salary cap dead money constraint, emphasizing the stark contrast between compensation and time spent on the injury report, and building that chronological timeline will entirely elevate the authority of this piece.
A corporate write-off might look incredibly clean in a boardroom pitch, but down on the field, every decision carries a heavy, unavoidable cost.
Yeah, it does.
Openly acknowledging that cost and meticulously mapping out how to survive it is what separates a good argument from a great one. We invite the writer to implement these structural adjustments and submit their revised material back to the critique for further review. Until then, keep refining.